Hi, I'm Nick, and welcome to, well, not Storytime, obviously. No, it seems I have hit 100 subscribers, my first milestone. It's a point I never expected to reach when starting this channel, or rather the show Storytime in particular, which is always my goal. I couldn't make it a reality until I bought a new computer, though. My last one was stolen, so when I started this channel, I only had a phone and some nerd rants, which are still up. They vary in quality. You can even see my first and utterly pathetic attempt at Storytime, a partial adaptation of DC vs. Marvel, in which I literally hold the comic up to this camera as I go through it. That's still up because I had no shame, and it might be funny to some viewers. I didn't finish it though, but it shows the desire was always there, to share these stories with the world, even if I didn't have the means yet. Anyway, I believe it is a done thing on YouTube to face the audience at milestone moments and explain just what the hell you think you're doing to them. So here goes. This is what the hell I think I'm doing. Throughout my life, my love of comics has always been a constant. There's plenty of text-only books that I like, but as you might have guessed, I prefer audiobooks to reading, simply because you can multitask with them. I used to lose myself in books all the time when I was younger, but as we get older, we often have less time and inclination to just sit and read. I know I did. And if you've listened to audiobooks, you'll probably recognize my style of performance from there. I was always good at reading aloud in school, even when most of the other kids were still sounding out words, and most of these comics I have read aloud just for my own entertainment, as a way to make them feel more real. I never recorded and played it back, though, although I did that with a few books, a long-distance relationship that I made for each other once. But I thought this was going to be a hard sell going in, knowing I wanted to focus on old and mostly forgotten comics. Don't get me wrong, I love that our culture has finally caught on to how well comics adapt to the screen in both live-action and animated forms, but so many stories fell by the wayside over the years, and I felt I could do something about that. I mean, how in the hell has Nightfall never gotten an animated adaptation? Just putting Bane in a movie and having him dislocate Bruce's spine is not enough. It's not the heart of the story, it's only the plot. So with Storytime, I try to bring these stories and characters to life the best way I can. I've done a little stage acting in school. My training as such is mostly just from listening to endless audiobooks, radio plays, and from reading comics aloud and practicing my favorite movie scenes, things we all do. I should say something about the visuals too, I guess. I've never been an art guy, as in I follow writers and I value their input more highly than the illustrators, which is also very valuable, but I believe that bad drawings cannot ruin a good story, but a bad story can ruin the best drawings. I'm not saying this is the right way or only way to view comics, only that it's my way. The most time-consuming part of reading comics is the text, and a lot of that is often in thought bubbles, narration, where you're hearing the characters' thoughts as if they're thinking to themselves. I find this is often the best part of the experience. It puts me in their shoes like nothing else does. And this is also the first thing on the chopping block when a wordy comic get adapted. Take The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. We can talk about Frank some other time. It's complicated, but he's not as bad as you may have heard. He used to be a qualified legend, and he seems to be getting back to his old self. The animated films they made of Dark Knight Returns are fantastic. Some of the best adaptations I've ever seen, but purely for time and pacing reasons, they cut out almost all of Bruce's thoughts, all the writing that went into the comic that made it what it is. Same for Year One, also by Miller, also a great animated film, and also lacking so much of the character that was left on the page and on the cutting room floor. So that's a big part of my channel, just giving this excellent prose a dramatic reading so you can know the real characters. Not that I don't love performing the dialogue scenes, obviously I do. Honestly, the only thing that even feels like work is the editing. So, I'll also tell you about my process, because I know I saw James Rolfe do it once. Much better than this, of course. Anyway, it often takes me a day or two to unwind from the previous episode and figure out what I want to do next. Often I'll plan to take the week off, but inspiration will hit me and I'll think, oh, I could get that done by the weekend if I hurry. And I'm off. I'm not even taking this week off. I have a quarter of the images pulled for Amalgam already. Half now. When I wrote this, it was a quarter. So that's step one, is rereading the comic and pulling out the images. I just use Screenshot and I paste them into MS Paint. I'm not fancy. I've used Photoshop, but it's far too many options for me, and I don't need it. Also, it's memory hungry, and Paint is extremely stable. Some pages are automatic inclusions, like covers and credits pages. I always want you to be able to know who did the art, in case you are an art person, and especially who wrote what. I don't know much about inking and coloring, but Comics Tropes does, and he has an incredibly entertaining and informative channel I can't recommend highly enough. I'm a story guy, so I figure out what is the essential story being told, and I cut out anything that doesn't serve it, anything not required for comprehension, anything that's repeated. A lot of things are repeated in monthly comics because of their serial nature. Every issue has to be an on-ramp, in a sense. But big things to look for are characters being introduced, actions that have consequences, causes that have effects. You have to make sure everything links up and tracks to each other, or at the worst, it can be easily dismissed. I have an idea of what will be adapted and what will be performed at this stage, but that's not nailed down until I write the script. I black out all the white borders to enhance the art, and I decide what's going to be single or double page spreads. Heavy dialogue scenes I usually make 2 pages, so if you see a bunch of text on the screen and I'm performing, you can look away from the screen. I plan for multitaskers like myself, and people who just want to listen. Often a second scene will be cut away to from a larger one, and those are often 3 pages, so I'll try to condense it by doing a double page for the first 2 and a single on the last. I try to only change scenes when I change images, but that's not a rule. It's a bit like storyboarding, I guess. Action scenes are usually 1 page at a time. I don't want your eyes to have to track action across 2 pages, and single image progression gives more a sense of time passing. I can't animate them, but I hope it's not too difficult to imagine the movement. I know I do. The real show should be happening in your imagination. All I do is provide a guide. Now, I'll have somewhere between 1 and 200 images usually, sometimes a little more, and I go through them with a notepad file and write the script. I just indicate what gets performed and write brief but compelling summations of the pages that get adapted, and explain whatever I think it needs explaining to someone who's never read the comic before. But I try to keep that to a minimum, with comprehension as the goal. Well, except for Doomsday Clock. That one is, how does Wikipedia put it, overly long and excessively detailed. I was too careful with the story, and probably not ready to tackle it yet. I've done a fair bit of creative writing, and I know I'm pretty good at it, but I just don't have original stories in me bursting to get out. This is what I always wanted to do. Anyway, my theory was that much of a comic can often be skipped or sped past with description, and as long as the important parts are there and presented with real emotion and effort, the story will retain its emotional impact, its power. This is what I feel is the heart of adaptation, that knowing what makes the story work. So after the script is written, it's time to record my performance. Every episode usually includes new character voices to develop, and I have a lot of context clues informing my decisions there, because so far everything I've covered is something I know very well. A lot of times I'll fill in with my impressions of a character's voice from another source, like my Superman is based on Bud Collyer from the old Superman radio show. He pioneered the change from the nebbish Clark Kent voice to Superman's booming timbre. My Batman, Joker, and most Bat characters come from the Batman animated series from the early 90s. My X-Men are pretty recognizable as being from their 90s cartoon. Often I'll perform the main character in my normal voice with only a little pitch adjustment indicating age. These are usually characters I feel that I've lived as for years of reading them, such as Green Arrow and both Green Lanterns, Hal and Kyle. Female characters have been the most challenging because I have far fewer options in my range for them, but I'm working on it. When I would sing at karaoke or for fun, I tend to mimic the singers, women included, so I have a fair bit of practice hitting that register, but my ideal range is from Eddie Vedder to Axl Rose. Other characters I have no reference for, so I might use visual cues, such as Hyrax in Where Angel Spirits Tread. She looks like Veronica Lake or some other classic Hollywood actress, so I gave her a voice like one, deep and sultry, kind of thinking of, who is it? Katharine Hepburn? I don't know. You probably know who I mean. Because you have to buy that Ollie is actually falling for her before he finds out just how murderous she really is. Figuring out the emotional context of every line is something I just have to feel as the scene plays, and every actor might approach it differently. That's the beauty of the craft, and the only really unique thing I have to offer, my perspective. I record in roughly half-hour increments both to rest my voice and because I've lost data transferring longer files onto the computer, so it's just safer. I would love to buy a real microphone, but it's just not a realistic possibility without some other source of income. I'm making about as much as I can at my job. But I've been thinking about a Patreon, mostly just to fund that purchase and thus improve the show. I have no idea what I could offer or what people would want as extras, though. Suggestions are very welcome. The final step is editing all together, and I use Adobe Premiere. I've been editing video for quite a while. I previously used to make fan edits of movies on a little community site called MySpleen. Most notably, I edited Memento into chronological order, and it becomes a hilarious comedy. And I took a crack at editing V for Vendetta to be closer to the comic, removing the virus subplot, the idiotic love story, and rearranging events to match the order of the comic. It has some holes, but for a reader of the book, it was better, I think. I might well branch out into video reviews at some point, but they would be positive reviews of superhero films I feel have gotten a bad rap from culture, such as Green Lantern and the 2000s Fantastic Four films, but that's only a possibility at this stage. I'm happy doing what I'm doing for now. Editing is mostly about selecting which takes are the best or fit the best together, and the rest is just pacing. I leave space at the end of a page to indicate a scene change, and hopefully you subconsciously pick up on it and anticipate a little better how the story will play out. Timing is essential for both comedy and drama, and you have to leave important moments time to land. I try to match the pace of conversations you see in TV and movies. I sync the images to change on the sound of the words, and any explanations I forgot to put in the script get put up as text at this stage. Then all that's left is to encode it and upload. And now that I'll look over the images and compose the thumbnail, trying to find a few large images that tells you what's in the story. My visual design is all over the place, but I'll often use a 3-cover template, such as in all the Invisibles episodes. Each cover represents one of the main story arcs in each episode. By the way, I'm very sad that no one's watching volumes 2 and 3, as I do consider the Invisibles to be my masterpiece, at least so far. Where Doomsday Clock was overly long, I do not feel the Invisibles is. I console myself with the assumption that all the people who watched Volume 1 just decided to get the comics and read it themselves rather than have me spoil it. I can dream. I tried to model the Invisibles episodes after my biggest success at the time, Providence. That was the episode that confirmed my decision to do long-form content primarily. You can see I started with time as a huge consideration, but now I let them be as long as they need to be. Once I got the images pulled, I generally don't remove anything for time past that stage. I love long-form content on YouTube, because when I find a creator I like, the length becomes an asset, not a liability. I aim to fill time with entertainment and a bit of comics history. I truly believe you have to experience the story beat by important beat for it to retain its power and effect. And for you Providence fans, I promise there is more great Alan Moore you've never heard of coming. Prometheus should be next, but I've absolutely got to cover his Swamp Thing at some point as well. I love to focus on the 90s because of the perception that 90s comics are trash. While it's undeniable that there is a great deal of trash in the era, I hope my channel shows that there were still great comics being made too. The speculator boom caused way too many books to be churned out. Talent was spread too thin, and the industry simply couldn't support the demand and maintain the quality. The irony, of course, is there has never been a more self-defeating investor bubble than the 90s comics boom, as they simply printed more comics to meet the demand, created more books to sell more issue number ones, and the vast amount of comics still around ensure that they will remain worthless forever. The 80s is probably my second favorite decade, as comics are really maturing as an art form and coming into their own, thanks to several breakout talents hitting at that time. Alan's Swamp Thing was what set the British invasion ball rolling in the first place, so it is foundational and incredibly imaginative. Prometheus is a comic Alan published under his own imprint, America's Best Comics, and it's about a living story who inhabits people through the centuries and into the future, and it's about magic and imagination. It's core Alan, in other words. Well, I think it's about time to wrap this up. I know I could do analysis or history videos, but honestly other people are already doing that, probably better than I could. I didn't see anyone doing what I wanted to do, though, really presenting these unadapted and largely forgotten stories themselves in a way you can feel, and I think that's what I'm best at. So you keep watching them, and I'll keep making them. And sorry if this was just boring to watch. Amalgam Showcase will be up next weekend, and it will cover both sets of Amalgam comics, sampling most of them and presenting a select few in my usual style, or close to it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for subscribing. It really does mean a lot to me.